One of the biggest challenges at the moment is there's an awful lot of people out there looking for a role at the moment. So in terms of it, when we do put a job advert out, we are pretty much getting fairly swamped with a number of applicants. You then feel like you're under massive time pressure to try and get through the process and get that person over the line and recruited, because somebody else could be actually doing the same process as you. Have taken them on board and they've been absolutely brilliant. They've been here for about 6 months now. They've been absolutely fantastic, totally smashing it. Do you actually need a CV in the future? This is something completely different in terms of what information you give us as a candidate.
Andrew, welcome to the Alooba Objective Hiring Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks, Tim. Thanks for inviting me on as well. Much appreciated.
My absolute pleasure. And where I'd love to start today is to get your views over the current lay of the land when it comes to hiring data talent. Like for you, think about the last year, what have been the biggest challenges for you in securing great data talent?
I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is there's an awful lot of people out there looking for a role at the moment. So in terms of it, when we do put a job advert out, we are pretty much getting fairly swamped with a number of applicants. So there's an awful lot of people out there at the moment looking for roles. So I think the biggest challenge we've got is how to kind of sift through the amount of applicants we do receive, and try and find the right people for ourselves, and how that's going to work. So, obviously we're not the biggest team in the world in terms of as a data team as such. So, the biggest challenge we've got is how do you actually whittle down the number of applicants. In some cases, we're getting 800, 900 applicants for a job, for our role. And obviously there's some amazing people buried in the middle of that. So the biggest challenge we have at the moment is how do you actually find those amazing people in that, and how do we screen them out? So that is quite hard for us to do in terms of doing that. So, I think also, but these days, I think most human resources teams are quite stretched as well. And so therefore they can provide you some support, but perhaps not all the support you perhaps used to see in the past. And likewise, the recruiting role fits with us in terms of as part of our business as usual as well. So again, that's probably the biggest challenge I've currently seen probably the last year. So also then, how do you then kind of look at the mix between the soft skills, the academic achievements, what they've done in previous roles, and also the technical skills? Because you can't, as you know, Tim, you kind of looking at all those different things simultaneously in terms of trying to find the right person in that sense. So you can do some screening on that as well. And also, the big challenge is just very, very time consuming for us. So that's kind of one of the biggest ones. And I think also then the issue you have is that when you do kind of get the shortlist together, and then you have to do some great candidates, typically they're interviewing with other people as well. So you then feel like you're under massive time pressure to try and get through the process and get that person over the line and recruited, because somebody else could be actually doing the same process as you as well. So I think that's been probably one of the biggest challenges. I think obviously in that sense, it also kind of risks to a point where if you try and speed the process up because you feel under pressure because you know that they're talking to somebody else, and therefore you kind of sometimes kind of just keep calm in terms of trying to get this person, or the right person as well, and try and persuade them to kind of hang on a little bit while we can put an offer together as well, and while we've done our kind of due diligence on that candidate. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges of the last 12 months. I also think probably graduate recruitment's always been quite hard in some respects, because again, we do use quite a few grads in our team. And again, looking at those grads is how do you differentiate between people also got a good set of academics, they might have 1 year out in industry. And obviously one of the things they may want to talk about is some of the dissertations or projects they've done. But beyond that, it's like, well, okay, what differentiates one grad from the other? So in that case, you're probably looking a little bit more the softer skills and their personality combined with strong academics. So fit and attitude are equally important as perhaps some of the academics in those cases. So that's probably been some of the bigger things for us, I think, in the last 12 months.
So the volume issue is something I'm hearing a lot. And what's a lot of people have said to me is it's not just the volume of applicants, which is a challenge, but there's a perception out there that maybe the applications haven't been written by the candidate themselves. They might have been optimized at least with ChatGPT, which then poses an extra problem of, is this really the candidate? And also, is the candidate actually engaged fully in this process because they've automated the application in some way? Have you noticed or experienced either of those issues?
I think probably I'd probably see more the latter at the moment. I'd say I think you feel like they've basically done a bulk apply to numerous roles. They're picking out 2 or 3 keywords, and that's just a bulk apply across the piece. And it feels a little bit like, perhaps a horrible phrase there. You're throwing some mud at a wall, and hopefully one of these applicants, one of these part of the process will actually stick. Whereas it feels like there's perhaps less consideration on why they want to work with this particular brand or this particular industry. That doesn't tend to come across, I think, with a lot of the applicants. You're right in terms of the case of how perhaps some people are crafting those responses and the covering letters using AI. That's more than possible these days. But you don't know. It's probably a little bit hard to spot at the moment. But it's also then probably quite hard to spot back, just given the sheer volume we're receiving at the moment. And I think you're probably right, Tim. It's probably something we need to kind of be conscious of and how more active around kind of trying to spot some of that stuff that's coming through as well. And I think, as you say, it kind of does lead the question of what happens when you actually come to interview these people. If they are successful to go through the screening process, where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's always been a challenge, hasn't it? The difference between what a candidate puts on their CV and then what you end up getting in an interview. And even before ChatGPT, there's sometimes a gulf in those two things. I wonder whether that gap is going to be even bigger now because you've almost like outsourced the morality question of how much you exaggerate to an AI system. You're no longer writing it. You haven't lied. You haven't exaggerated. The AI is hallucinated, which I love that euphemism. So one of this problem is going to become even worse.
It could well do, particularly. I think it's also perhaps the more and more applicants, more job roles they apply for, then obviously the model will get used to certain phrases and will pick up certain phrases around their careers. Or if you feed in certain buzzwords in terms of, say in the data space, and people want to say, well, I can code in SQL, I can use Python, I can use R, I've got exposure to Google Cloud, AWS, etc., etc. And then how do you unpick what's been written versus reality, I suppose?
Yeah, and one thing someone said to me this week was that so not only were they getting a high volume of applications, but also a lot of them looked good. Like they had hundreds that seemed to be a good match to the job description. And a lot of them looked very similar to each other. It was almost like a uniformity or conformity, probably meaning they'd come from the same large language model at some level, maybe.
I think that's going to be a bit of a worrying trend in some respects, because as you know, as a recruiter, then you can't whittle those people down to a shortlist because, as you say, this might be, instead of having 10 in a shortlist, you might have 30, 40, 50. And then that's the amount of effort you then have to put into that to try and pick those down. It's going to be quite considerable. If you all look very similar on paper, if you all look very similar on paper, then you think, well, you kind of got to take them through the next stage because you might be missing out on somebody. But it's, it could be a bit of a worrying trend in the short term for sure.
And I kind of have a lot of empathy for candidates because they're in this market trying to get a job, tough market conditions for them. They're probably seeing and hearing, oh, I've just looked at this job on LinkedIn. It's already got 500 applications in a day. Bloody hell. I better apply to way more jobs than I thought I had to because it's almost a numbers game that I view it. And you could almost imagine this problem snowballing as much, more and more, I wonder.
I think you're probably right because I think it's kind of, it's in most cases it's quite easy to apply on LinkedIn, so you can quite easily put in multiple applications for any role. And some of the roles that's the job title level. Some of our roles are quite broad because we're wanting data analysts or data engineers, but also in that case I'm more specific in some of the skills we want. But the general job title will be data analyst, and that's quite a broad spectrum for a lot of people. And therefore people will pick up on that, or they are actively searching for those terms and they'll say, okay, right, as you say, I'm going to put that, I've got nothing to lose to put the application in at that time.
Yeah, especially as if there are these tools now that even automate that step, like they would go through and apply en masse to jobs. You wouldn't even have to fill in the application form. It would write the CV or optimize your CV for you and complete the application. Then the marginal cost is almost zero.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, I don't think that's going to go away in the short term for sure. It's going to be a continuing problem, I think, for us.
And how practically did you deal with getting 800 applicants for a role? Like, was it actually possible to screen all the CVs? Did you have to share them on the team, or?
We had to share it out basically. That was the only way we could do it. So we're looking at the kind of some of the keywords. I think we've come to the conclusion we need to be a lot tighter on the keywords we're looking for. Really, 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 really tight on some of those. But I say it is difficult because it is a data analyst role. Obviously, we've got slightly certain permutations around that in terms of what we're looking for and the skill sets we're looking for, or perhaps some of the software we've used in the past. But it is quite a broad title. But again, it's quite hard because you're looking at they answer certain questions in LinkedIn, for example, in terms of tick the box of criteria. So, I think we typically have 5 or 6 criteria against a role, and some people will put down that they meet 4 or 5 of those. So you do kind of have to dig into those. That is that actually accurate? So it is a bit of a slog. So I think it could become a kind of a bit of a AI software arms race that we're then employing technology to filter some of these candidates out as well. So where does it stop, kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the CV is maybe run its race as a screening tool, because if you can just create them en masse and optimize it, and it's just deviates so far from reality, then do we need a new data set? Like, are there different metrics we could be using or should be using in the next year or two to do that screening to decide who to actually bring to that next stage? I wonder.
It's possible in terms of what perhaps experiences are, or whether or not you can screen on mass for technical competency as a first round, for example. For example, we always, regardless of the analyst role, most times they do need decent spreadsheet skills, be that Google Sheets or Excel as a bare basic, because you're always pushing stuff out in that. How can you screen for some, say, degree of coding ability in SQL or Python or R or something like that? Can you screen in advance for, if the role requires some sort of BI tool knowledge? Most of the packages are similar-ish, if you like, in the scheme of things, really. So whether you could pre-screen some of those things from a technical basis in advance, and then on the technical side of things, then you would perhaps cut down a fair chunk of the number of applicants already prior to going into their other side. I suppose again you could perhaps pre-screen some of the academics if they could load some of the academics up into a platform as well, and then we can set some guidelines around that as well. So perhaps it might be a different kind of application form as opposed to a traditional CV, where, as you say, do we get candidates into certain data points, certain bits of information, which we can then say, okay, you meet those criteria, yes, no. And then, as you say, with that, you can actually automate some of the technical tests as well. Again, as initial pre-screening. That will then certainly take the number down quite substantially, I thought.
Yeah, and I think at least with that approach, it's easily measurable. So at least if you use something that's quite objective in the early stages, then maybe covering off the things a bit more subjective, the softer skills, the fit into the organization. That's something that's going to come out in the interview process, I guess. But at least once you've gotten them there, you can be sure they've got some of the basic technical skills that might end up working pretty well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
You mentioned also another challenge around, okay, so once the candidate's actually in the process, then realizing, oh, hang on, this is quite competitive because we found the one amazing candidate, one of several amazing candidates out of the 800, but everyone else is also onto the same candidate. Um, I watched an interview just 2 days ago, and I know you're a fan of football. I watched an interview with Graham Potter where he was talking about where he used to be at Brighton and their approach to recruitment, and really wanted to take the emotion out of the recruitment decision, use kind of facts more than feelings a little bit. And what you said resonated, which was, when you're in this kind of fight for a candidate, it's helpful to maybe just relax and not suddenly change your requirements midway. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think you tend to be fine. Sometimes you are pressurized by if the candidate hasn't come through our internal HR department, and sometimes we also use agencies because they've got access to different talent pools. And obviously the agency know that the candidate's talking to other employers or other prospective jobs. So sometimes you do feel pressurized from the agency, like, okay, we know this person's interviewing second round interview, they're going to get an offer this week, etc., etc. So they put pressure onto you in that sense. So we kind of know that the clock's ticking. So I think we do try and speed the process up a bit, but we still will go through the same steps. We won't cut a step, because ultimately, if they're interested in us and we're interested in them, then you'd hope that they would also then give us a bit more time on their side as well. Still, I feel like stall the other stall the other employer to give us a little bit more time to finish our process, because hopefully, we've got a strong brand. The company's got a strong ethos as well, and hopefully it's a sector that they are actually interested and want to work in. So, hopefully there's lots of positives on our side as well, and not just all the other bits and bobs. So we try and speed things up, but we don't try and cut corners. I think also we kind of perhaps a little bit sanguine, saying, okay, if we can't get it over the line, we can't get it over the line. It is what it is, because we might be making a rush decision, and then you're then into obviously their probation period, and we're certain hopefully they'll see on every candidate to succeed, but it's never any guarantees in that sense. So I think we try and stick to our guns as much as we can on that one. You might bring interviews forward or try and compress different parts of the process within the same day to kind of cut that kind of the overall elapsed time down. But I think our preference is not to cut corners, and if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. So,
what about this? If you think back to all the candidates you've interviewed over the years, differentiating the ones who became successful, who you ultimately hired, versus the ones who fell by the wayside. Maybe they got down at the first interview round, the second interview round, a test. How could you classify the types of candidates who you haven't hired? Are there any kind of recurring patterns as to why you haven't ultimately chosen them?
I think it's probably two or three things. One is, I think it's a very, very old adage, but I still think first impressions matter. I think at the end of the day, we're all social animals, aren't we? So kind of how we interact with each other is really, really important. And I think you can tell quite quickly with how enthusiastic a candidate is for perhaps the role. Us as a brand, I've worked at multiple brands over the years, and also just their personality as well. So one of the big things for me is, are you enthusiastic? Do you really want to join us? Are you interested? Have you got passion for the brand? Have you got passion for the role? And that, if you can push that across pretty quickly, then us as hirers will kind of our ears prick up, because we want to engage in that conversation, we want to explore more with you and understand a little bit more about you as a person, I think. So it is a bit of an old chestnut. It's a bit like when you go around and buy a house. I think when you walk into a house or a property, you kind of know within the first 10 or 15 minutes of this, you want to explore the property a bit more, or you'll go to the real estate agent and go, thanks, but no thanks, you've got to walk away from this one. It's a bit weird. So you kind of got this, I suppose, it is a gut feel to start with, I suppose.
And is there a particular way the candidate would not demonstrate that? Is that just their body language, like how happy or enthusiastic they seem to be, or is it more around the research they have or haven't done? Like, how do they demonstrate?
I think research is an interesting one, because I think we have had candidates in the past where you'll open them up with fairly soft questions around us as a brand and us as an industry, before we kind of go into deeper ones. And if you can't answer the soft questions, then basically you haven't done your homework. So if you haven't done your homework, how interested are you, us as a brand or an industry? In some respects, we can perhaps accept that you might be not 100% interested in the industry as such, but you'd be interested in the fact that we're going to give you interesting things to do, and we're going to give you challenging things to do, and we're going to stretch you, and we're going to give you all the training and the rest of it. So you don't necessarily have to say, right, I'm mad about the news and the media. I really want to be, that's my sector. I've always wanted passion to work in that sector. So in some respects, we can balance that off. It's that kind of attitude and challenge as well. So I think you kind of expect them to kind of know the basics, in terms of what they've done some research and done some prep for us. We had a candidate recently which we took on board, and they were completely deadpan during the interviews. They're I think we took them on because their academics were great, their technical skills were great, their experience was great. But during the interviews, they're incredibly hard to read. So hard. But the reason was, I think they're just trying to be ultra professional. So it's all kind of like quite good. not say poker face, but they're a very, very hard candidate to read. And we're like, okay, is this going to work? Are we going to have to fit here or not? And so in some respects, we took a little bit of a chance on the basis that everything else stacked up. We've taken them on board and they've been absolutely brilliant. They've been here for about 6 months now. They've been absolutely fantastic, totally smashing it. Great member of the team. So sometimes you don't get those signals. It's really hard, but we kind of okay, on paper and logically, this is a sensible decision to hire this person.
And so would you describe that in the interview process as not particularly enthusiastic?
It was just very, very professional. Whereas we're not saying we're kind of laid back, but we're fairly easygoing. I'd say easygoing bunch of people as a team. We're kind of not so we have a laugh and we have a joke because we know that we're working in quite a pressurized environment, but we have obviously a bit of banter within the team, and we're not we all dress casually here in the office. We're not kind of that that sort of environment, and we're fairly haven't much got hierarchy either as well. So in that sense, we're kind of fairly flexible, fairly laid back, and therefore, as an interview goes on, we'll have obviously all the standard questions, but we try and be, I'll say, jokey with the candidate, but try and be open with the candidate and friendly with the candidate, try and just tease out what they're like as a person. So it's and obviously we all know each other here, so we reach out as part of this the interview process. We're a bit more open and not always. Some elements of the interview quite formal, some elements are less so in terms of trying to understand what they're like as a person. But in this particular case, the candidate was so deadpan, very, very hard to read. So, but it turned out the right decision. But so I think that's one of the big things as well. I think, and I think also probably some of the ones that don't always work out in this the testing process is we don't necessarily give people the toughest test in the world, but we deliberately time limit it because that's a reflection of some things you have to do here, because being a news organization, things will break, things will happen, news stories will come out, and the editorial team want to know very, very quickly what's going on. Well, is it positive or negative if what's happening in the world? So you have to be on your toes sometimes, and that react to those ad hoc queries. So we tend to particularly time limit people. So I think then sometimes people get a little bit how they manage that time to go through that process. Sometimes you can see where they make mistakes because you understand why they've made a mistake, and we'll give people a bit of leeway with that. But sometimes just don't really manage the time through that interview, through that testing process whatsoever.
And that's a test that you do in person in the office, is it?
Back in the day, there always used to be in person. These days, we do them online because typically we don't see candidates until probably the last stage. Sometimes you don't see them in person at all, depending where they're based and time and all this of it. So what we tend to do is we will email them something. They accept that they've received it, and we basically start the clock. They've got to email it back to us. So obviously, I probably guess what you're going to say in terms around that from a testing process these days. Obviously, how do you cope with that as the rise of AI and all the rest of it can answer some of the questions? But there's a bit of various bits of data manipulation and things like that to do for them to present things back to us. So I suppose they could stick it into a bot if they wanted to, but it's probably just as quick to process the test as it stands at the moment. But again, there might be something to think about. How do we actually deliver those technical tests if we're doing them remotely? So that could become more of a challenge to us as well.
Okay, so theme wise of where candidates fall over. So some would appear to have a lack of enthusiasm. Maybe they haven't researched the company or the industry even at a basic level. Maybe don't seem demonstrably interested. Some candidates can't maybe handle turning over the analytics quickly enough in that time pressure environment, which matches your work environment. Anything else?
I think that probably one of the big things is demonstrating what they've done. So concrete examples. If you've said X, Y, Z in your CV, what is the concrete example in terms of, how have you done a piece of analysis that meant churn has gone down by 5% or revenue's gone up by 3%, or how do you hit these KPIs and ROIs? It's having those concrete examples in terms of, if you said X, Y, Z in your CV, then what's the example to back it up? And again, I think some candidates fail on that basis as well. You've made the statement, so therefore we're going to say, well, okay, you've contributed X, Y, Z, so please give us examples of what you've done to actually to do that. And sometimes they struggle with that as well.
I'm interested in that piece. So then is it that they struggle because they just like made it up, or maybe their contribution wasn't really that significant and they wasn't part of the team? Like, have you noticed that any particular?
I'd say it's probably more the latter. It's kind of how, was it significant? Was it part of a team? How much did they actually contribute to the team? Were they just on the edge of the team, or were they kind of part of the drive in the team? What tasks they've been given individually to complete in terms of therefore they've achieved more on their own? And how do you unpick some of those things where they've either been part of the team or individually? So I think it's kind of, if you're making certain statements on your CV, then we're pretty much going to say, well, please give us examples of how you've actually achieved this. What do you do? What was your role in this? And sometimes the answers can be a little bit waffly in terms of, again, it's kind of unpicking what they're coming back to you and saying, like, okay, you've said X, Y, Z. What did you actually do as part of that process? What was your true contribution to that?
And I would have thought if they haven't really contributed at the level they are presenting in a CV, they must collapse pretty quickly under a bit of, I was going to say interrogation, a bit of questioning from you as a data expert. It must become immediately apparent when they haven't done what they kind of purport to do.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of like, hey, you've said you've done X, Y, Z, so demonstrate how you've done X, Y, Z for us. And therefore, it's obvious that you can then feel sometimes that they're then on the back foot because they've not demonstrated what they're claiming to do.
It's a really interesting problem, isn't it? Because I feel like there's this almost like a motivation for candidates to oversell themselves in a CV to get a foot in the door. Because if everyone's exaggerating, if you don't also exaggerate, suddenly your more truthful CV looks less good superficially than people have exaggerated. So I wonder if there's almost like they feel like they have to play the game, but then eventually they're going to come unstuck in the interview, surely.
I'd have thought so, yeah, because if you give a fairly rigorous interview process, then you're going to kind of go through their CV in terms of, okay, what's your skill set, how that matches to the role, or what's your experience. Obviously, sometimes we recruit within industry, sometimes we recruit outside of the industry. So either way, it's perfectly fine, but it's kind of, okay, what is your level of achievement in terms of what have you contributed? So as you say, it's kind of, at some point you kind of get found out that you've not done that. I think it's also, you have to look at the level of experience. So if you're a grad or you've done your first job, then we're probably not expecting you to have done a huge amount of things, but you've had a solid 1 or 2 years in a role. You've developed your skill sets. You've got used to working office environment. You're used to dealing with senior stakeholders, whatever it is, and you've picked up the technical requirements of the role, and what have you turned on a day-to-day basis. So one of the questions we always ask is, what does your typical week look like? Just to get a basic understanding of, Monday to Friday, what do you actually do in terms of what's your percentage breakdown of your time? How much is it doing analysis? How much is it doing reporting? Are you spending a bit of time doing learning and development? Or what meetings you go to? How many ad hoc tasks you get? Analysts always get given ad hoc tasks. So, how many ad hoc tasks you got every week, and what's the turnaround time for that? Are you on any projects? So I think that tends to give us a decent feel in terms of what they actually look like. And then you can obviously compare that back to what they're saying in the CVs. Like, if they're saying they're spending 3 days a week doing reporting or something like that, then it's like, okay, so where's that fit with all the other bits of what you're saying? So that's a typical question. It was one of our typical questions as well.
Yeah, I love that one because I think especially in analytics, that title can be so misleading. Like you could basically be punching out Tableau dashboards all day, every day, or you could be doing really intense, complicated, deep dive analysis. And they're chalk and cheese roles, really, even if they have the same title. So the question is, like, I think subtly really, really useful in unpacking what they're actually doing.
Yeah, and I think also we follow up in terms of, I think also conscious that, what do you actually like doing in your role? Tell us about what you actually like doing. And the flip side, tell us what you find a bit, for all intents and purposes, boring. Because everybody just, I can guarantee in my working week, some bits I'll have to do is boring because it's kind of just admin and bits and bobs and some meetings you have to go to. It's like, okay, I could probably do something, do something else, but it is what it is. So we try and get them to articulate in terms of what do you actually like doing in your role and what is actually where it's not that great, but you have to do it type of thing. So where do you find some frustrations in your role or things you'd rather be doing differently, or bit of processes, or you do manual data input, or what is it that kind of makes you go, or should I do something else? So we try and tease that out as well, because that gives a better reflection in terms of, we'll know what our role looks like. We'll know what a typical role, a typical week would look like for an analyst, in terms of depending where they are in the business. We've got to refine that so we can then understand from them in terms of what do they like versus what's friction for them, and then understand is it good. And we've had some kind of like all they want to do is reporting, or as you say, they want to build kind of BI dashboards or something, which is typically not the kind of role we have. So it's like it's like we have a mix. It's like, okay, so you kind of put yourself in this little box, but it's probably not for us. It's probably not for you either. So on the flip side.
Yeah, I feel like one big theme in hiring is that a lot of it could be improved. I mean, maybe this is just like life in general. A lot of it could be improved by just both parties being as honest as possible, as quickly as possible. What exactly does the candidate want to do? What can they deliver? What does the job offer? If it's a data scientist role, it turns out it's many tabular dashboards. The candidate is probably going to be pretty unhappy if they get in there on day one thinking they're going to build a, regression model and blah, 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 and then they're just doing dashboarding. And so I feel like, the more information each party could give as soon as possible, the better off they'd be.
Oh, I totally agree. I think you're better off being transparent and also saying that, if part of your role is reporting, then, you might be that the whole of your Monday's reporting potentially. And the rest of the week is project work, ad hoc analysis, insight, and training and development. But you might as well be upfront about that. And so, like, typically it's weeklies, monthlies, quarterlies on a Monday morning. Get them out the door, but after the rest of the week, it's more kind of more interesting stuff. But there's some of the things that don't go away. You can obviously automate it as much as possible. Is you try and automate as much as possible, but that doesn't always go away. So,
yeah, I can think of my very first experience hiring people. This is 10 years ago. And the environment we were working in was what I describe as Excel hell. So this is 10 years ago, when if I'd said to someone, hey, I reckon we should have a data warehouse, they would have said, what's a data warehouse? And it was just each month was this kind of epic effort to produce this one Excel report from hundreds of other Excel reports. It's like, kill me now, basically. And I remember hiring an analyst to come in to join me to hopefully take care of a bit of this workload. And they quit in the first week after they realized what garbage environment data they were having to deal with. I then hired the second one. They quit within 2 days. Okay, so the first two people I hired quit within the first week. I swear it wasn't me. I swear it was the data, not me. Okay, I was a reasonable boss, I think. But they were my introductions to hiring, and a lesson there was like, we overpitched the role because there was so much manual effort. It was really, if we presented as, the first 3 months, just automate this because this is hellish. Then once you get past this basic stuff, then we can start doing more interesting things. But we probably overpitched and oversold it. And so that was one of my fails as a hiring manager. What about you? Can you remember any particular fails you've had as a hiring manager? Anyone you've hired, you thought, oh, I've made a bit of a blunder here?
I think probably not massively so. I think where we come unstuck a little bit. I think one is around probably perhaps explain to some people that sometimes the role's quite intense. As I mentioned before, being a media organisation, you have to be very reactive. And therefore, it's how do you have that kind of personality to have about 10 plates spinning at the same time, and then to introduce the 11th plate. So I think sometimes we've had candidates where I think they've found that difficult. So whether or not we've explained that enough in terms of, it's a fast-paced environment, lots going on. If the site traffic's good, then people might want to know why the traffic's good. They'll definitely want to know why the site traffic's bad. And therefore you need to drop everything. And also you've got things like, as I mentioned, we're recording this 7 days after the US election. So we were very, very busy last week. So people want information kind of instantaneously. So it's how, as hiring managers, how do we look at people's ability to adapt in that scenario? How to, personality-wise, in terms of, are they okay with that periods of quite pressurized and periods? It's not always like that, but also how do you actually cope that from a personality point of view, and how do you manage your workload? And I think that's probably where a couple of times where they've been really great analysts, but the demands and nature of the role has been quite challenging for them. So they've kind of ticked the box in terms of, technically you're good, the output you produce is good, but sometimes it's kind of, they just found it hard. And so I think it's quite hard then to probably, how do you kind of put that across to a candidate that sometimes is going to be quite tough. I was speaking to somebody working for the gambling industry last week, and they have the same sort of issues where big gambling events in the UK, we have obviously the Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival or things like that, and the analysts expect to turn stuff around kind of pretty much instantaneously, because obviously they know that if they have a good gambling event for a big sporting event, that's going to make their month or lose their month. So you've got to be on it as well. So I've kind of felt a little bit of sympathy for them as well. So I think that's where we've struggled, perhaps explaining that sometimes things are a little bit pressurized, and the ability to manage your workload and the ability to how you cope with that. Also support people as much as they can. Also, everybody kind of internalizes that slightly differently and how they approach that. I think then the other area I think is probably, I think the area we did find quite hard is probably over COVID and lockdown. So we took on quite a few people during COVID and lockdown, and we're perfectly honest, our retention rate for those members of staff has not been great. I think that's probably been repeated over a lot of business as well, because I think it was very hard to integrate them into the team. Everybody was remote. You barely saw people. You might have a team meeting, a Zoom call once a week, catch ups on Zoom, but there was no kind of those bonds or people kind of coming together and different ways of working and coming together in that sense. So obviously now we're in a hybrid situation, which is great, but I think that was a massive challenge from us in terms of how to support people, particularly perhaps in their first or second roles during that period. So I think that's kind of impacted our retention during that time period. That it was quite hard to look after people in that sense, and we probably didn't give them quite hard to perhaps give them support around that, because you're stuck in a room on your own and that's it. So I think that's probably, from our kind of hiring challenges, they're probably the main two over the last couple of years, really, on both sides of those coins.
Yeah, and I would have thought if you were a graduate or recent graduate and your first or second year of work experience was bang, you're working in your bedroom, you now can't see anyone. My God, that must have been incredibly challenging.
I think we're all trying to adapt to it. So I think probably hindsight, how can you do that better? I don't know. Perhaps more check-ins or not, I don't know. Or how do you work more collaboratively with other people? But it's all the little things, the silly things of, go around to the corner to go and get a coffee or a sandwich, or go and having a drink after work, or we do social events every month in terms of we'll do a pub quiz or something. But you kind of miss all those sorts of things, so you just don't have those bonds with people that you kind of want to have.
What about AI? So we've spoken a little bit about that in terms of probably candidates using it to craft a CV, potentially to apply to jobs, maybe to help them with assessments and those kinds of things. Have you seen AI already impact hiring in any way? And also, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years?
I think we haven't at the moment. I suspect, I don't know if it applies to some of the teams, perhaps with the IT and dev teams, they might see it more than we do. So I think it will impact. I think, as we mentioned, I think it would. How do you actually kind of unpick somebody's CV? Have they written it themselves? Is it factually correct? And again, that's kind of a big thing. I think I can see the benefits from our side, certainly from screening. I certainly see the benefits from technical tests, how to actually kind of go that, and perhaps we can be more rigor on some of those tests as well. And I think I think we discussed earlier in terms of how could you perhaps then, I think you put through a very interesting question. Do you actually need a CV in the future? This is something completely different in terms of what information you give us as a candidate. So So you can actually screen that through that process. So excuse me. And then, so I think that could help us as well in terms of that process and actually kind of going through whatever you said, and also perhaps even some of the fact checking stuff. So it might be even some simple stuff like in terms of if you've told us X, Y, Z, can we then go out into, say social media, or can we go out into LinkedIn? So, does all this information actually marry up? As part of those sorts of processes. I know certain industries, they certainly do take people's social media profiles as well, and that I do know that. So it is quite interesting in that side. But I think certainly as hiring people, I think we will definitely be using it. It might be 1, 2, 3 years down the line. I think we will definitely be using it. Again, to kind of just sound like a bit of an arms race. If candidates are using AI to create the information, then we're using AI to kind of double check. And I do know some people who are university lecturers, and they've got the issue at the moment where students obviously perhaps be using AI to generate dissertations or essays, and they're using other tools to double check the content that's in those kind of those essays they've presented back at the university. So it is kind of a bit weird. So and also, as you see, I think also as you mentioned there, sometimes AI models get things wrong, and also they hallucinate as well. So I think you got to be really conscious of that. So it's definitely coming. And I can see a role for it as well. But yeah, I think it's watch this space.
Yeah, it'd be amazing to see what happens in the next few years. Hey?
But ultimately, you still want to have what's in terms of how does the candidate approach a problem on their own? What tools they're using, and what's their thought process? Not just relying on a software. At the end of the day, AI is a tool. We also have this interesting concept of it's kind of out of Pandora's box, so you can't uninvent it, and people will use it. And should you be using it? And we're having lots of debates internally how we approach AI in the newsroom. So in terms of what's the benefits, and what's the potential risks and downsides. So today we're a news organisation, so what we have to put out there is factually correct. So you can't have any scope for hallucination or inaccuracy in terms of that. So at the moment, all the journalists produce all the content. So, but also there is scope for kind of operational efficiencies, but you've got to be really careful about that. So, but it's definitely coming for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just, so many paths this could take. It's really going to be fascinating to see where it lands in the next few years. What about on the other side of the table? If you think back to your experience as a candidate getting jobs, any especially memorable experiences you had, good or bad?
I think I was thinking about this. I think it's kind of one thing is I remember back when I just came straight out of uni, and then at that time, I think it's going back a long way because I'm giving my age. I won't give my age away, but it's a long time ago. But they used to do lots of graduate assessment centres, and looking back on those, there were a huge amount of really challenging, but a huge amount of fun. So you should be away for 2 or 3 days. So all these exercises, team building stuff you used to have to do on your own versus that. Obviously, they were obviously subtly quietly, assessing you all the time. But looking back on that, it's a great experience to do that because you're only kind of 21 straight out of uni. It's kind of before you get into the kind of world of work proper, and you got to get being packed away into a hotel for about 3 days and things like that to do all this kind of stuff. So it was all good fun at the time. I think I'm not sure how any people actually do that these days in terms of graduate recruitment, things like that. It's probably gone by the wayside, I'd have thought. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny. So I went through similar things when I was a graduate. I can't say we had them for multiple days. That sounds pretty epic. We had them for maybe a day or maybe a weekend, like Saturday and Sunday or something like that. But yeah, my memory of that was it was always quite weird if you were doing like a lunch session and people are watching you eat and how you kind of communicate and while you're eating. I don't know, do you wipe your mouth? I don't know what they're looking for. I don't know what the criteria was, but they were definitely inspecting my munching, which I found slightly odd.
It just is basically it's how do you interest in team games and things like that, or team tasks. So that's gone as well. But no, I think it also. Coming to this role as well. So I've been here for 7 years now. And again, that was like a really nice, my boss there as well. So, she was amazing. And then that was such a nice process in terms of that. It's very probably slightly informal because I've obviously done a fair bit of work in the industry, working for a competitor business, if you like, but also in the same building. So that was fairly it's like a funny process because basically when I changed jobs, so I used to work for a different newspaper, which it's one now. So I literally lived about 300 meters inside the same building. So it was kind of a bit weird because you still saw everybody the same day, but it was like a really nice process with my current boss, and she was like very welcoming and very kind of laid back at the start of that process, but she's on it in terms of the questions and the approach and fit and all the rest of it. She's really on it. But the whole process was quite a little bit informal, but very informal, but very, very professional. So and that was like a very nice hiring process as well. And she's excellent. Yeah, she's an excellent hiring manager as well in terms of how she approaches recruitment, in terms of fit and blend within the team and culture, and wanting people to live the brand values and wanting people to be excited about the brand. Because also we got a slightly unique position in the media industry in the UK. So she's very, very passionate about that, and she's all she get very, very pertinent questions out, but kind of do them in such a nice way. But they're really, really kind of deep, pertinent questions. But the way she kind of approached it was like how to look at people's kind of personalities and kind of dig into their experiences. So she's very clever in that sense as well.
My final question was going to be about a hiring hero, whether there was someone who you thought did hiring in a really impressive way. Would it be this lady or someone else?
It would be Jo, who's was the chief data and marketing officer here. And then, but I think she, as I said, incredibly passionate about the brand. Why do you want to work here? Very passionate about the brand values and what the business stands for. I think she's very conscious of how everybody works together and have we got a good fit in terms of the people. Also very keen on giving people from less usual backgrounds to come into the media, having a diverse team as well. How can we have a diverse team in terms of people's experiences, backgrounds, which we're very fortunate that we do. Obviously, London's a very cosmopolitan city, so that helps in that sense in terms of as a recruiting pool. That makes it a bit easier for that as well. So I think she's very conscious as well of that, and how we fit it into the business. Because we're one of the bigger teams in the business, but we're also a central team, so we have to support everybody. So it's that ability then to kind of communicate with other stakeholders and be that as well. So in some respects, she's always comes across as a very gentle interviewer. But as I say, all the questions underneath are very pertinent, and all the questions are pretty much on the money, and she kind of tease out all those answers around people. So very good person to learn from for sure.
Amazing. And I think the diversity angle is maybe even more important, I would think, for a business like yours, because if you had just mono thinkers from the same background running a media agency, that is very dangerous, I think, to go down that kind of rabbit hole of thinking the same way again and again.
Yeah, and also we've got different brands within sub brands, if you like, different websites who are kind of catering for different audiences. So again, to have that understanding is really important. Some of the audiences are a lot younger than, say, the core brand, or they're looking at different segments of the market. So again, to have that understanding is fantastic. It's also good to have, one of our sister brands is more focused on London. So it's great to have people in their 20s or early 30s who are Londoners, born and bred. They understand what's going on in the city, so that kind of helps as well. I think we've got a really nice mix of people as well, for different backgrounds, different academics, different degrees of studied as well. So it's a good mix. So we're very, very fortunate for having that as well. So
sounds like a great environment you guys have got there.
Yeah, we do. It's a really lovely team. They're all very, very supportive to each other as well. So they're a great bunch of people. So
wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about that, and for a great conversation today on our Objective Hiring podcast. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
Cheers, Tim. Thank you very much indeed.